Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the Head of Marketing at InfoTools. Today we're joined by Ethan Kellough, co-founder and Chief Product Technology Officer at Highlight, an Agile in-home usage testing platform that is making it fast and easy to conduct research with physical products. Ethan was a mechanical engineer and physical product designer who made the switch to starting a software company that helps physical product people, like his former self, iterate and improve on their products through user-centered in-home research. Ethan is passionate about making physical products better and reducing the waste in the product innovation lifecycle, so we can all focus on delighting our customers with their experiences of the products they buy. Thanks for joining us on the show, Ethan.
Thanks so much, Michael, for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Cheers. So, Ethan, what's the most significant thing you're going to tell us today?
Yeah, so the most significant thing we're going to talk about today is the massive world of lessons that the software and digital product industry has taught us about developing and optimizing products, and how we can take those lessons and use them in physical product development as well.
Cool. So you've worked in both the design space for physical and digital products, as we just heard. Can you give the listeners a quick rundown of what each of these are?
Yeah, for sure. So it's fairly simple. We start with the definition of a product, which there's lots of different definitions out there, but I think my preferred one is just something that solves a problem for at least one or more people, is generally a product. And that problem might be, hunger if it's a Mars bar. It might be, comfort if it's a chair, or it might be something as specific as I need to pull a staple out of a stack of paper for a staple remover. And what's really different is there's physical products, which are things we can touch and feel and interact with. And then there's digital products, which live generally in a screen of some sort. And the sort of life cycle of both of those products is very different. But in general, sort of we see some differences in how those products are developed. And we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the history of why, I think, in a little bit.
Yeah, okay. So you touched on those differences just a tiny bit. So can we expand on that a little bit, the differences between both physical and digital products?
Yeah. So I think, we're generally, all of us are familiar with both physical and digital products, but 20 years ago, when you talked about a product, if you were at a dinner party and someone said, "Oh, I found this amazing new product," 99% of the time, your mind would immediately jump to that product being a physical thing, a tangible thing that you could experience. And nowadays, there's a different definition, which is that, this world of digital products has come in. And if you're to Google, what a product is, you get almost a lot more results for digital stuff than physical stuff. And even this, nomenclature and the distinction that we have to make now between digital and physical products isn't something that we'd have to do sort of 20 years ago, let's say, sort of pre-dot-com boom. And so, what we've seen is that this digital product industry has grown up really, really quickly. The physical product industry and mechanized production, starts back in the Industrial Revolution. But the software industry, as we know it, has really grown over about 25 years. And it's really dominated our cultural discussion and dominated the way that we interact with the world, is having all these new digital products. And of course, there's been a lot of money and investment and time and energy spent into improving the way that digital products get built and developed. And as a society and as an industry, we've become really, really good at developing exceptional and valuable digital products. There's massive value in the digital product space for both for the value it provides to people by solving their problems, as well as sort of those other measures of value like stock market value and investment value, and all that kind of stuff. And so there are two very different types of and ways of solving problems. But because the software and digital product industry has developed so quickly, it's really outpaced the innovation that we put into the physical product industry. And I think what we're seeing now is that that the physical product industry is still sort of really ripe for optimization, and it still has a lot of sort of waste in it that never really got addressed over the past 25 years. One of the numbers that we talk about at Highlight is just that 30,000 new products are launched every year, and 90% of them end up failing, don't make it, in the market. Some people would call this sort of the law of market failure, is that things are more likely to fail than they are to succeed. But that number is a little bit astounding, that we haven't gotten better at making good products. Certainly, the physical world isn't going away as much as the metaverse people would want us to believe. And so I think there's a discussion now to be had around how we really improve and work on how we optimize the products in the physical world.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned the software industry has well and truly outpaced the physical product. What are some of your learnings for those that are in the physical design space, and what can they glean from the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, and I don't claim to be sort of the most knowledgeable person in this space. You touched a little bit on my history, and to expound a little bit further, I was a mechanical engineer, and then I went back to did my master's degree in integrated product design, went into the digital space and founded my own company. And so I've seen sort of both sides of this experience of designing and developing both physical and digital products. And I think sort of what I've learned is just that there's some really, really great lessons that the digital product industry has really held on to, and has, over this pace of really rapid innovation over the past, 20, 25 years, have really come to be tenets of how you develop digital products. But I don't necessarily see those same things being reflected in the physical product space. And so, I see that there's an opportunity to really take those lessons that digital product designers have learned, and bring them into the market research space and the physical product research space, and use them and leverage them to help solve some of these problems we have around developing physical products. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'd love to jump into sort of one of those lessons, and really start to dig into it. So I think the first one that I've noticed a lot that gets talked about a lot in the digital space, but isn't always reflected in the physical space, is that the best data we can collect is the data that most closely reflects reality. And I think I want to say that this not existing in the physical product space isn't due to, as far as I can tell, a lack of people's interest in seeing it this way, but is often due to sort of structural challenges between physical and digital products. So we all sort of know inherently that when we're researching something, if we have data that is real behavioral data of how someone will use or interact with a product, that is better inherently than sort of stated intent. Someone buying something off a shelf data can be more useful or more valuable than someone saying that they would buy something off the shelf. And that anything that isn't sort of that real behavioral data is some sort of approximation of reality.
And that comes down to the whole what people think is different to what they say is different to what people do.
Right, exactly. What people do and how people do it is some of the most rich and useful data. And as we get further and further away from that, we introduce more approximation error.
Sure.
But what happens in the digital world is that it's really easy to test new ideas and collect behavioral data. It's not so easy in the physical world, and sort of the more closely that we reflect reality in the physical world, the more operationally difficult the test tends to become. Whereas in the digital world, it's not quite as sort of linear of a distribution. It's really it can be almost as easy in the digital world to do a stated intent test as it is to really collect behavioral data. In the digital world, it's quick to put up a landing page and measure how many people click a button. But to do a similar thing in the physical world requires coordinating tons of people and resources and money just to be able to get that behavioral data. So I think one of the challenges we have is really like this operational difficulty for physical products. And so what we've done as an industry in the physical product world is we've come up with some approximations that we call sort of like good enough approximations, and are a good balance between the operational difficulty but the approximation error. Right? So we say, hey, we know that this isn't a perfect measurement. It's not the best behavioral data. But we're okay with sort of the trade-off of we're going to introduce a little bit of approximation error to significantly reduce the operational overhead. And so I'll give an example maybe of sort of one way that we do that. So there's a physical product testing methodology called the central location test. Which I think most listeners might be familiar with. You bring people to a facility, they do something with the product, and there's a researcher there who's observing them, or they're answering a survey about that product. And we've said, the operational difficulty of distributing this product to people is so high that we're just going to distribute it to one location and have the people come to us, and we're going to get them to test the product. And so that's, there's a little bit of approximation error introduced by doing that, but we're okay with that because it reduces our operational overhead. And that can be well and good. But I think that what I want to do is question that assumption, and what we started to do at Highlight is question that assumption that those two things are operational overhead and approximation error are diametrically opposed, and say we can have both. And we can have, low approximation error and low operational overhead. And sort of that's part of what we're starting to do at Highlight is build ways to get, with our in-home usage testing product, get real in-home feedback, which reduces that approximation error, but also by using software and technology reduces that operational burden. So that we can get that behavioral data that most closely reflects reality.
Sure. So one of the things that you often hear teams doing is they want to go out and validate. Like how do you position or recommend teams go about this?
Yeah, so this is another great lesson, I think, from the digital world. And it's that what I like to call it is be skeptical, or default that you'll assume failure. And one of the things that digital product teams do and UX researchers do all the time is they reframe their research from a validating exercise to an invalidating exercise. And this is really, I would say, like born from the scientific method and born from scientific research is to you want to invalidate the null hypothesis, right? But part of the challenge that I see in the physical world is that it's a lot easier to validate an idea. Again, because of sort of the operational overhead and because it's hard to operationalize an experiment. It's effortful and costly to operationalize an experiment. And so when you put this energy and effort into operationalizing this experiment, you kind of want it to succeed. You're often also fighting, I think we've all sort of had those experiences of fighting organizational pressures and people's egos and trying to push something through, and you're trying to always validate your idea so that you can get it on to the next stage. But in the digital world, it's a lot easier to put 5 ideas out there, and that operational overhead doesn't exist so much. And one of the things that we've seen at Highlight that some of our best clients do to help them turn a validating exercise into an invalidating one is they'll have a plan B. And it's a really strong way to reframe the idea of, instead of saying, hey, we have this one idea or we have this one option and we need to validate that it works. It's to say, hey, we have 2 ideas and we're going to invalidate, or we're going to try and invalidate them. And the plan B idea, we're still okay with if the first one fails. And so I'll give an example. We had, a client who was testing 2 different versions of a new sort of like spread for toast, basically, kind of like a Nutella competitor. And they, rather than just saying, hey, we've got this one, we want to validate that people like our spread, they said, we've got 2 different versions of this spread and we're looking to invalidate one of them. And that slight framing of having a fallback and having a plan B to say, hey, we're gonna pick the less valid, or we're gonna try and get rid of the less valid one and move forward with the more valid one, can be a really good framing and a change that I see sort of digital teams doing all the time, but is really challenging for physical teams because of that operationalizing an experiment being so difficult.
Yeah, sure. So risk aversion is obviously another potential hurdle that you have. I mean, with digital products, you can be a lot more just go to market, test something really quickly. But with physical, there's obviously that cost, the effort, the time. What kind of advice would you give executives in terms of their risk appetite for testing physical products?
Yeah, I think that really, there's 2 parts of this equation: is again research effort, and then the risk of being wrong. And I think that what you want to do is you want to size the effort that you're putting in proportional to the risk of being wrong. And again, in software, the effort required for research and for getting good research can often be smaller than the effort, for physical products. Writing a few, lines of code to test something in production with real users can be a lot faster and cheaper than tooling up a whole production line, just to get something on a shelf so you could test it, people will buy it. And so I think, one of the things that we're working on at Highlight and that we're thinking about for physical product researchers is to, again, reduce that effort required in research, so you can do more testing when it should be done. We see a lot of times, because of the difficulty in operationalizing research, people know that there's risk in them being wrong, and researchers know that there's risk in them being wrong. But sometimes, we come to this decision point of, should we research this? And the operational overhead of doing that is so expensive and so challenging and so frustrating, that we take on sort of risks that we don't want to take on, or we say, you know what, there's too much risk and we don't have a good way to test this. And so we're just going to kill this idea, or we're going to kill this concept because we can't figure out whether it's right or wrong. And I think that is, you know, one of the main issues, or a big issue that's stymieing innovation is, we're a big company. We've got all these products. We have this cool new thing that we think might be good, but there's also risk in launching it and it failing. But because we can't operationalize the right test to be able to validate it, or invalidate it, we're not really going to take that risk in launching it. And so I think being able to size that research effort and scope the right size of research proportional to the risk of being wrong is important.
Yeah, sure. So for those within insights teams who are in non-product focused roles, what sorts of things can they do or should be mindful of when feeding into the overall design process?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely researchers that are, you know, focused on researching for products, and, you know, sensory researchers and people who are looking at packaging and claims and all those sorts of things. They're directly, intimately involved with the product. I think, though, if your research is consumed or used or sold to any company that uses physical goods to solve people's problems, you are inherently involved in the physical product research development process. And this sort of, you know, the law of market failure of 30,000 new products launched every year and 90% of them fail. You have an intimate, you know, role in helping solve that problem. And so I think you can still think about sort of the things we talked about previously around invalidating ideas and sizing, you know, your research effort appropriately, and being able to get data that closely reflects reality. But I also think that, you know, coming from my personal experience working in physical products, is just, you always feel you often feel removed from the customer in the physical product world in a way that isn't as common in the digital product world. In the digital world, it's very common for, you know, even engineers and physical product developers to be right next to customers on a call and talking through it with them, that in a way that doesn't happen in the physical product world. And so as a researcher in this space, being able to think about how people are consuming your research and get them closer to those customers and closer to the stories that are happening, so that they can really understand sort of the why behind what they're doing, can be really helpful. I think the other sort of idea that I have in terms of people who are on, you know, insights teams in non-product focused roles, is just this idea of taking a risk in software is relatively low. You know, you can ship a few lines of code, you can roll it back if it doesn't work out, you can make a change at any time. But with physical products, you have to, you know, tool up production line, you have to get a lot of people involved. And so I think that there's an opportunity for research to really give physical product teams a chance to take risks, and you know, help companies that are typically risk adverse, that putting things out into the world is seen as a risk, and use research as sort of a way to really incubate these ideas and reduce that burden of being able to put things out in the world. We've seen, I think, sort of in the past little while, it's become easier than ever for anyone to really start a physical product company. And we're seeing all sorts of, you know, smaller challenger brands coming up from the grassroots. And they're oftentimes winning in you know, corporate battles because they are able to be agile and consumer centric and take these risks in ways that big companies haven't quite caught on to. And so these sorts of principles of agile and consumer centricity, you know, need to bubble up to the higher levels of product organizations if they're going to be able to succeed in the long run.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you've also got that idea of streaming. I mean, you've got these small little bets, which you may make the medium and the big. You've got this would be a really cool thing. It's a big grandiose idea. Let's get that tested, but it's just a small part of what we're doing. We've also got the mainstream ideas, which are safe. Essentially, there's that kind of approach that you could be taking as well. So you're not having to throw all your eggs in one basket, which has got a small chance possibly in that the 90%.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing trends towards this, and innovation teams and in larger corporations are becoming better and better. I think, you know, it's been a time where because of the success of the software industry in such a short period of time, I think we've seen a lot of physical product organizations respond with a pressure that often comes from the top, comes from the CEO, to be, more user centric and more agile, because that's what these software teams are. They're user centric and agile, and they've driven success by that. The reality is, agile as a principle implies being able to iterate quickly in the face of new information. And in the physical product world, there's no way to achieve true agility if your feedback loops are really, really slow. If research takes a really long time to get done, or you run a test and it's 8, 10, 12 weeks later when you get that data back, the concept of agility is almost impossible, because that feedback loop is too slow. And so, one of the things that we've done at Highlight with building technology to replace the in-home usage test is, an in-home usage test that might have taken you 8 or 6 or 8 or 10 weeks, we can get down to 2 weeks. And so by having those feedback loops be a lot smaller and a lot tighter, we're able to closer approximate what those challenger brands are doing, and how they're winning, because they're so close to customers. And we're also able to drive research in places where it wouldn't have previously been possible. We worked with a large cookie brand that you'd find in any grocery store, and they had a production line going in 3 or 4 weeks. And they needed to run a test on this new cookie that was going out to make sure that it was the right formula. And so they came to us, and we were able to get them, from the very beginning of the project kickoff to the final data set. They had insights in less than 2 weeks. And they were actually they learned in this process that the cookie had something wrong with the formula that people didn't quite like. They were able to tweak the formula literally days before the production run, and change it so that it was going to be more successful at market. And so that ability to be agile is super, super important, and definitely speaks to just being able to sort of have those different streams of research.
Cool. So there's obviously been this huge event around the world that is COVID. How do you think that has impacted physical product research?
Yeah, massively. I think obviously, during COVID, there was almost overnight, there was a whole bunch of methodologies that became impossible, that were essential methodologies for physical product researchers. Focus groups, central location tests, small intercepts, all those things basically became impossible. And what we saw from our vantage point at Highlight was just sort of 3 options. One is you can skip the research. You can say, oh, this is not possible, so I'm just not going to do it. And that's not a great option, for a lot of reasons, of course. The second option is you do a methodology that's less suited to answering the question at hand. And so, you might pick a digital first or a more lightweight methodology to be able to get some answers, but not the best answers. And then there's sort of this whole host of problems that really can't be solved by skipping research or doing a different methodology. Stuff like taste testing and sensory evaluations. And the sort of the third option was to just do something in people's homes, because that's where they were during COVID. And so, what we saw the opportunity that we saw at Highlight was just that doing that in-home research was a huge challenge for teams. And so we built the technology and automation to be able to do in-home research a lot faster and quicker, and get better data back. But I think the overall sort of industry arc that seemed to happen through COVID was just a lot more comfort with going digital first, and using DIY tech. I think that we've seen a massive explosion in DIY tools, both in the digital space as well as the physical space. And it's something that the digital world has been really comfortable with for a really long time. But the physical world is catching up on being able to feel comfortable doing DIY research, and having a subscription to a software that helps you do that kind of research. So we're seeing more and more that happening, I think, in the industry. And I think COVID had a big impact on teams who had no other options having to do that.
Yeah, sure. So one reflection I've had in this space, product, etc., is regarding where exactly the product design teams sit within an organization. So physical product teams are typically sitting under marketing's remit, part of the 4Ps. From a software design perspective, however, they straddle their own department, or engineering, for instance. So do you think, how has this contributed to the gulf you've seen between the physical and digital?
Yeah, I think, I can't speak to every company and every corporate structure out there, but I think, the answer is, there might be a contribution. A corporate structure is a response to a certain way of solving a problem. And I think that what we've seen in sort of the more traditional, historical, longer living physical product industry is that by putting these product design teams in physical organizations under marketing, you often you're coming from sort of a business goals perspective and a quotas perspective. And so marketing is coming down and saying, okay, we've got these goals, we need to sell this stuff. We have maybe some user insights about what that would be, but at the end of the day, we're trying to drive business goals. And I think the difference in the digital world is this focus on user value, and constantly, interrogating where do we provide the most value to our users, and pulling that thread over time, and allowing the pulling of that thread to sort of drive what you build and for whom. And constantly, obviously you're accountable to business goals, and obviously you're accountable to driving revenue for a digital product. But the shift and focus is really on allowing the product team to say, hey, this is, we're gonna take a broad view of where we can provide the most user value and continue to pull that. But I don't know how much the corporate structure has sort of an effect on things so much as just the inherent differences between physical and digital products.
Yeah, sure. So, there's pluses and minuses of being in both camps. What do you think digital may miss out on not being as close to marketing as they were?
Yeah, I think one of the main things is just marketing is so strong on strategy and how we sell things to users and the strategy behind that. And I think the flip side of not being as close to that and following, user value and user needs is that over a longer period of time, that can lead to sort of products being bloated. And we've all had those experiences with digital products where it doesn't seem like there's a clear problem they're solving or a clear strategy behind all the millions of features that are sort of blinking at you, every 5 minutes, because every single incremental feature is just a new way of solving a small user problem. And so being close to marketing really, helps drive that strategy in the short and long term. And to some degree, I think the digital product industry has responded with the role of product marketing managers who help sort of imbue that strategy. But definitely sort of some lessons still to be learned there going the other way as we continue to iterate on the digital product industry as well.
Sure. So just getting at the old crystal ball, how do you think the physical product research industry is going to change in the next decade or so?
Yeah, I think I think it's those two principles we talked about already, which is agile and consumer centric. And I think that we're definitely getting much better at consumer centric. And I think that the research industry as a whole really understands what that means now, and is finding ways to bring consumer centricity into physical product research as much as possible. Where I think we've still got a lot of work to do is on the agile side of things. And that's not only research's problem. I think, there's opportunities to make product research more agile. But because the value chain of physical products is so long and there's so many players, I think there's opportunity to imbue agility almost at every stage of the process, from R&D to manufacturing to research to testing, and to be able to conceptualize, how would we conceive of and test a physical product in a week and validate or invalidate whether that's something that's worth using to consumers. I don't think that's a problem that we've solved yet, but I think that if we do want to, as an industry, become this beacon of agility that we hope for, we will need to start to tackle those problems. And so I think there's lots of sort of technologies and lots of opportunities being pursued there. Certainly the promise of 3D printing, for example, is that you'll be able to replicate anything as quickly as possible. It hasn't quite panned out yet, but you could imagine a world where you might come up with an idea for a new Mars bar and be able to print 100 prototypes tomorrow so that you could send them out to consumers and get real testing. And that would be a really cool place to be in as an industry, because you can really have that true agility and learning that can drive amazing innovation.
Well, how long ago was it that Star Trek created the replicator, and we're still waiting for it?
Exactly. Still waiting for it many years later.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. So if I can recap what we've talked about today, we started off with an introduction, an overview of the differences between, or first off, what is product design, and then you went into the physical and the digital. You touched on how the pace of innovation in the software industry has outpaced that of the physical. A number of reasons for that. It is a lot easier to take digital products to market than it is physical. There's obviously a lot of logistical challenges with physical, but that is speeding up. You touched on the waste that is in the physical product industry at the moment and how it is ripe for optimization. You went through a few of the lessons that the industry has learned over the past 20 years and how that can be applied to physical product research. You shared some of those lessons with us around the best data is that often most closely reflects reality. The need to invalidate rather than necessarily validating, and having the two options is quite a good approach for organizations, because they at least have something to fall back on if they need to. And the size of the research effort needing to be proportional to the risk of being wrong as well. We also had a quick little reflection on the impact that COVID has had into the physical research space, and also what you're hoping to see over the next decade, particularly that of agility to coming across the physical product research process. So I think that covers it, right, Ethan?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. The last point I just love to touch on, or the last clarification I'd love to make is just, um, I've talked about how the digital product research industry has evolved so quickly, and the point of bringing that up is not to cast shade on the physical product research industry. There's thousands of physical product researchers out there that are doing amazing jobs and are developing and researching amazing new innovative physical products. And there's tons of innovation happening in this space. But I think that the opportunity that I see and that we see at Highlight is to take those lessons that we've learned from the digital product industry and start to say, well, how would we apply that to the physical product industry? How might we, take these principles that the digital world has espoused and bring them back into the physical world? And I think, like you talked about, the physical product world brings a lot of sort of logistical and operational challenges that the digital world doesn't. But every single one of those challenges is an opportunity to improve the way that we do research in physical products. And the digital product industry just sort of serves as a blueprint for how we might do that. And so I don't want it to sound like digital products or digital product researchers are inherently better than physical product researchers. That's not the point of this topic. It's more to say, let's look there for how we might improve our industry and hopefully derive some hope that these sorts of challenges can be solved and that we can really start to work on that problem of 30,000 products being launched every year and 90% of them failing.
That's right. I mean, one final thing on that point there is you've never heard of someone selling an old app that they made in 2010 for $2 million, have you? But you do hear of people that have found an Apple One or an old Macintosh or the original iPhone for a ridiculous sum of money. So there's definite value in the tangible. So keep up.
Yeah, we're not going away from that value anytime soon. That's for sure.
That's right. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a great discussion.
You're welcome. So for the listeners out there, if you've liked what you've heard today, please subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to share it with others or even leave a review on your podcast platform. So thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.